Letbrix has once again asked me to review one of their products, only this time I get to choose what to review. As I cleared off my workbench, I picked up a copy of my Nickel Plate Road magazine, and I noticed the Alco RS3s. Now there's a relatively well-known diesel that I've yet to see. Now, maybe I have a little bias towards yellow and black diesels, but let's take a look at the Northern Pacific RS3. This model was designed by Jeepaz and Yellow, a creative team with consistent output on all forms of transportation. Their trains focusing on the 70s to the modern era. Now, if you've never heard of Letbrix, they are a Chinese company that partners with creators to take their digital instructions and make them into a ready-to-build model using alternative bricks sourced from 7 different building companies. This is what I like most about Letbrix. They are able to provide a financially viable alternative to sourcing bricks to make the same end result. If using alternative bricks is not your preference, this review is still about a model that can be made using regular Lego parts. The review's focus on the design will still be identical. With that, let's see what we got. The usual gray packaging was this time adorned with a Letbrix logo proclaiming, "Let the bricks enter our life." Growing anticipation as I opened the package. This time it was a plain cardboard affair with a picture of the locomotive. The parts were in one large bag, with a small box containing additional parts and the electronics. There are no printed instructions because it is cheaper in China to put them on a USB drive. Included was the disclaimer. This USB flash drive contains prompts, such as product manuals. The product is prohibited from spreading and copying. Once found, we will take up legal weapons to protect our rights and interests. With that legal disclaimer out the way, it's time to sort out the parts. Meanwhile, let's talk about the prototype. The American Locomotive Road Switcher series started off in 1940 with a request from the Rock Island. They wanted a diesel-electric locomotive at home switching or on road trains. This initial boxy design gave way to the RS2 with a new turbocharged Alco 244B motor. Competition soon sprang up from EMD's GP7, the Baldwin AS16, and the Fairbanks Morse H1644 in 1950, which meant Alco had to respond to stay in the locomotive building game. The response was the RS3, a 1600 horsepower road switcher that gave EMD a run for their money, but ultimately was outproduced and overshadowed by the GP7 and subsequent GP9. Like many Alcos, the RS3's career typically ended in the 1970s, with some still in service on short lines and heritage railroads across the United States today. Unlike their big boy set, the RS3 has 1,284 parts, which is much more manageable to sort, and I was able to fit all of the parts onto my desk. Immediately, I noticed that I did not have any train motor bogies. Only 4 of the classic train wheel pieces, and 4 more wheel sets unattached, lacking any metal axles. When I went to check the instructions on the USB, there was no mention of this change or how to build around it. I was under the assumption that I ordered an operational locomotive, and the creator agreed that a dummy version was not what he envisioned. I reached out to Letbrix as I began work on the build, and they agreed that this was a mistake and the correct parts would be mailed out. In the meantime, assembly began, with the end steps smartly packed into the bogie design and the fuel tanks quickly coming together. The plates and tiles that made up the frame of the locomotive came together in a very durable design, kicking off a running word I would use to describe this build: sturdy. Jeepaz and Yellow are fine creators who have certainly know what they are doing, and it was evident by their use of the new 2x6 tiles topping off a robust frame, something that provided a much cleaner look to previous alternatives. After the frame came together, the instructions said it was time to put the bogies and fuel tank on the frame, but my own advice is to save that until later, just so nothing gets damaged while you're assembling the body and no wheels or fuel tank parts fall off while you're trying to piece everything together. The battery box was placed onto the frame and the brackets began climbing up the sides. A small but important touch was the dark bluish-gray wooden floor and control stand. I have been lucky enough to operate an Alco locomotive very similar to an RS3, and the control stand was an excellent representation. The first vertical push was on the cab sides, which used a creative series of studs-on side pieces to build out the angles of the windows. I really like the techniques used to pull this off, and the bracing is well hidden within the body of the engine. After building up the cab ends, the sides of the body quickly built up with brackets. The headlights on both ends followed before I gave the locomotive its iconic feature. The curved body of the RS3 wasn't possible until 2020 with the invention of LEGO Part 67810, a curved 2x2 slope piece, and after putting it on the body, the iconic shape of the RS3 really took off. The cab roof was finished off with a nice contour achieved by hinge plates. For the sides of the body, tiles filled out the brackets, and one tricky step came from placing tiles over the motor area. The gap is bridged by 2x6 and 1x6 tiles that are held by the rotating part of a 2x2 turntable plate. In order for these to fit, the notch on the end of the turntable plate must be cut off with a hobby knife so it will sit flush against the battery box. The notch came off easily with a hobby knife, but please use caution and be careful when doing so. The last steps were fitting the handrails to the locomotive, and for me, attaching the bogies in the underframe. The dummy bogie solution, as it was, did not work for the model, and the wheels barely held everything together. Thankfully, when the power bogies did show up, I was able to fix this so I could follow the instructions as intended. One detail omitted from the instructions was how to wire the locomotive. I did this by removing the roof of the body and bringing the wires up through the fuel tank and putting them in the A and B side of the Lepbrix battery pack. It's quite straightforward to work out, but it's still worth mentioning. The issue worth noting with the build was that the flexible housing was a little on the narrow side for the clips, or the clips were too wide. I'm really not sure which one the issue was. I had to take a pair of pliers to each clip and give it a small pinch to make sure the hose stayed in place. This was a small issue that I did not experience with the Big Boy and its flex hoses, so I'm not sure if this is a parts quality issue from one of the companies Lepbrix sources parts from, or if it was a hose issue. Regardless, this was a very minor fix that, in a way, was a long-term solution. Looking at the completed model, it really captured the Alco RS3 perfectly. And I should mention, it's not a generic one either. This specific version was meant to represent the Northern Pacific's models. They owned 14 RS3s, 7 from a 1953 order and the rest from 1955. The intended road number for this model, as evidenced by the decals, was 858 in the canoe paint scheme that it wore most of its life. In 1970, when the Burlington Northern was formed, it was assigned the number 4082 and wore its Northern Pacific paint until 1977 when it was finally painted green following a grade crossing accident in Beaverton, Oregon. The locomotive was stored with a bad order main generator on November 6, 1977 in pristine Cascade green. This too was short-lived when the court case that ensued wanted to restage the accident in May of 1978. The plaintiff's lawyer ordered Burlington Northern to repaint 4082 back into the Northern Pacific's canoe livery to prove the paint on the locomotive was poorly visible. This somewhat backfired for the plaintiff, who said the locomotive was far too clean and made the railroad and some of the cops present throw dirt and oil onto the nose of the locomotive to dim down the shiny paint. Even though 4082 was inoperable at this time, this was simultaneously the freshest Northern Pacific paint and the last one in Burlington Northern's sea of green for just 3 short months. 858 was finally scrapped in August 1978 in a cosmetically stunning condition. Now, I was so surprised by the research that I found on this locomotive's history that I had to ask the creators if they knew about this. They were unaware of the prototype's history, and they found it interesting. Unfortunately, the Lepbrix model omits these decals. Regardless, the road-specific details include the warning light on the cab, horn, bell placement, and the flying number boards. The model does an excellent job of capturing the look of a Northern Pacific RS3, only with one small issue. The couplers use the traditional LEGO buffer piece, which is wildly inaccurate for American trains, but fits fine and has historically been used for LEGO models. Now, for a more serious modeler, you can easily swap this to the Brick Model Railroader 747Z KD coupler, which is what I intend to do to run with my rolling stock. Performance on this locomotive can be best described as disappointing. This is not due to the motor bogies, as those run as well as the LEGO versions. The main issue with the electronics is the electrical box that has been a thorn in my side for years at this point. On paper, it can be turned on, easily syncs with the remote, but performance is just one speed, full blast. With 2 train bogies in the opposite direction, you'll have to have the A and B buttons pressed at the same time to move, or else one will slip and struggle to move the locomotive. I'm baffled by the decision to include that particular brick, as Letbrick's Big Boy set used a Power Functions clone that has the speed steps and performs better in every regard compared to this thing. A locomotive built for switching and road trains should be able to change speed and go slow to couple up gently. Quite frankly, this was a huge letdown. Now, for what it's worth, the locomotive can navigate R40 curves and switches, but due to that high speed, it can fly off when it's just running by itself. A couple of freight cars seem to do the trick with keeping it on the rails, but due to the size of them, looked a little silly on R40 curves. That's when it hit me. This set isn't for somebody who's going to run this on the standard LEGO train curve, someone who calls it the R40 curve. The thoughtfulness that went into this design and the attention to detail is on par with the elevating standard of LEGO trains. This is meant to run with Brick Model Railroader or Brick Train Depot freight cars of similar detail and quality. At 1,284 pieces, this set cost $120 for the unpowered version, with the Powered Elements version selling for $149. The value for parts blows the Bricklink option out the water. Take that money you saved buying the model and convert it to Power Functions, PFX, or better still, the new Bluenami DCC decoder by Soundtrax. To put it quite bluntly, this is a set you'll never see made by LEGO. In terms of the price and part count, it's very comparable to the 2020 Crocodile set, but that's an internationally recognized locomotive. Well, this is for a niche North American builder. Need I remind you that LEGO is an international company that makes sets worldwide, so prototypical trains like the Super Chief, the Hogwarts Express, and the upcoming Orient Express fits well in that scope of customers. Letbrick's Big Boy has that same worldwide appeal, but this one doesn't, and that's a good thing. For the seasoned builder who wants to fill out their layout, I can only give this set a glowing recommendation. I know it seems like I wouldn't, but this set provides an excellent base model and springboard to elevate its performance. And with that, I'm thankful that Letbricks is an outlet for some creators to have niche models produced as a complete, ready-to-build set. I do look forward to seeing what future products they have in store, but for right now, I'm hoping to work on some freight cars to pad out this train, and I think yellow has just what I need. A big thank you to Letbricks for sending me a copy of this model to review. You can check them out at www.letbricks.com and follow them on Facebook to stay up to date with any deals or sales they might have. Letbricks offers seasonal promotions and discounts, so if you're holding out for a better price, give them a follow. And if you want to stay up to date with Toledo Rails, there are some big projects and surprises in the work that you won't want to miss. Make sure you subscribe to stay up to date, and I'll see you in the next video.